started, I introduced myself as the Deputy Race Director, my experience with solar car racing. I will also introduce myself in my day job. I work for Raytheon. We do lots of complex projects that are going to be 2, 3, 4 years down, and there's just so many parts and pieces that come with that. And one of the things that I've had to do is to plan everything out, make sure that we chop all the different tasks up into smaller pieces so that we can manage it. We can see when we're falling behind schedule, what compromises we have to make in order to get to the final goal by a deadline. And this is really applicable to solar car racing. As you manage a solar car team, this project is not some kit you put together in 6 weeks. This is something that takes a year, takes over a year. There's a lot of things involved. There's going to be a lot of things you have to learn along the way, and you have to account for the time to fail, the time to rework, the time to experiment. And so I'm going to give a few words on that. As with every presentation, you always start off with a quote. All things are created twice, first mentally, then physically. The key to creativity is to begin with the end in mind, with a vision and a blueprint for the desired result. For me, this quote is really important because it's all about thinking about what you're going to do, plan it out, and then actually bringing it to fruition in terms of the physical. And so you have to, there are times, and I'll admit that in the World Solar Car team, we may just go and start grabbing some metal and welding it together and bending it, but we really had some high-level plan in mind. And without having an idea, a design to start from, you just can't start throwing things together and expect that all the pieces will work out, that the motor and the controller and the power trackers and the solar panels all have a place in the car unless you have planned it out. Okay, so why do you need project management? Solar car projects are complex. They include and involve multidisciplinary teams. We typically separate out solar car teams into its mechanical branch, and so those deal with your suspension and your steering and your framing and the like. You split off into an electrical team that can handle all the wiring, the motor and controller connections, the battery, and so on. You may even split up into your array team, and manage how you might design an array. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. And then you've got business as well. This is not just an engineering project. You have to be able to come up, talk about your project to the public, talk about the project to potential sponsors and businesses, to the community, to city councils. You need to be able to do all of those things, right? You might need to have a team dedicated to communications so that you can make sure that your sponsors are well informed about what's going on. So, there's a lot of pieces that are in play. Solar car projects take a long time, as I said, it's a year plus. And it requires development of new skills. In a lot of solar car teams, as high schoolers, there are those who come into the project interested, but they may not even know how to turn a wrench. They just haven't had the opportunities and experience. So you have to plan for that and account for that. Okay, so what does that mean? When you look at this, when you have multidisciplinary teams, how do they work together? What are the linkages between those teams? A project that takes a long time, how do you make sure that the project is done on time when things don't work out? The development of new skills. Do you know how to allocate your resources appropriately so that progress can continue to be made on your project? So let me give you an example. Typically, you would start building your vehicle frame first. You would start, welding things up. So I wouldn't want to teach a new team members how to do all the electrical stuff up front, because you really need, basically all hands on deck cutting metal. So you need to know how to use the chop saw. You need to know how to use a grinder to deburr the metal. You need to know how to weld it. So you want to take the time to plan those things out first before, as you go along and as you start construction, then you could train team members on the next steps and the next steps. It's all about proper planning. So project management, we're going to break up all those, the larger thing. I have to build a car. Well, what does it mean to build a car? I have to break them up into smaller pieces, right? And then link those tasks together. What's the roadmap to get to the end there? Fleshed out dependencies between teams. So if let's say I'm on the electrical team and I need to put all the instrumentation together. The mechanical team may need to have from you the information to make an instrument panel, right? So that's a dependency you're going to have to put in place so that your electrical team has a proper plan for what the instruments look like so that the mechanical team can make that panel and put it in. We talk about just-in-time manufacturing, the idea that you want to make sure that all your stuff are ready, all your parts are in place, so that you can build it. One of the things that we did, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides, is you have to have a list of tasks for the week, and especially as an advisor, you have to make sure that all the parts you're going to build, you have the parts for. You have to have sufficient steel if you're working in steel. You have to have sufficient wiring. You have to have all the raw pieces ready for a team, or else you're stuck. You don't want 5, 6 students sitting there. It's like, well, I've got no resistors hanging around, or I got no bolts to put this together. And you send a parent to go buy the thing and come back. It's just not a very good use of time. Okay? And then set trip points for evaluation. In a long project like this, you need to know, am I on track? Am I going to meet the deadline? And you can't just look at the final deadline, right? You can't say, my deadline is I have to have a car in July for the race. Well, you got to start stepping back and say, well, what does that mean? Do I have to finish the car? When do I have to finish the car? Maybe May, so that I have a couple months of testing. Okay, if I have to finish the car in May, well, when do I have to, let's say, have the array done? When do I have to do the electrical system, and so on? You just have to start planning those tasks out. And then from there, when you have these macro tasks, then you break it down into work by a week-by-week basis so that everyone has a task list, everyone knows what's going to happen. And do work on the critical path. That's, in my project management days, it's basically saying, you may have a lot of parallel tasks going on, but there's a line of tasks that are going to be critical, or else you start slipping schedule. So if you have a task that has no dependencies, you just finish it and it's done, great. That's typically not on the critical path. But if you need to finish A in order to start B, in order to do C, in order to do D, you have to make sure that that schedule is taken care of. And if that means that you slip the non-dependent tasks to the right so that you have time to address that critical path, you got to do that. And so this is the putting trip points for evaluation and prioritizing work. You need to make sure that things continue to move forward. Okay, so this is easy to be said for someone who's already done this before, right? If you build a solar car, you know what the tasks are. It's easy. For new teams, it's not so easy. But we do have a project planning calendar pamphlet that gives you rough guidelines as to this is when things need to be done by. And so we talk about organizing your team in September, design, fundraising, parts, prototype and build, and this is why you're here now, is we're giving you all the detailed design issues and concerns. That's the prototype build. Leave time for re-engineering the car and testing, and then if you follow all of that, you will arrive at the race prepared. Okay, so how do I develop a more detailed construction timeline? We talked about this a little bit. You have to break down your solar car into its major systems and into its subsystems. So if you've got a mechanical, you've got frame, suspension, steering, and so on. And then you start noting the dependencies before that, right? So typically, you have some type of dependency between your suspension and your steering, right? And so you have to be able to have your suspension in place so that you know where the steering rods are going to hook up. So you have to note that dependency. You have to know what type of batteries you have and how you would wire up the batteries before you start hooking up to the motor and controller. So that's a dependency. So note all those things down and then start allocating time to it. One of the things that I did when I was in high school, my advisor had challenged us to be aggressive in our schedule. The way we did that was the advisor had in their mind, it's going to take you 4 hours to do a particular task. He didn't tell us that we had 4 hours to do a particular task. He gave us 2 hours. Said, you got to do it in 2 hours. And we'd rush to some degree. And we try to push and get it done. And typically we would get it done in, let's say, 3 to 4 hours. If I gave 4 hours to a team member, they'll take 6, 8 hours. The time always slips. So if you can be aggressive with your planning to say, hey, in terms of motivating team members, say, hey, go get this done, give them a challenge and say, you've got 1 hour to do this task, you've got 2 hours to do this task. That really gets them motivated and not feel like, oh yeah, I've got all the time in the world, I'm just gonna dilly-dally and play Minecraft on my phone, I don't know. So, and then the key thing is, by having this type of schedule, then you will not eat into your re-engineering and test time. It is very, very difficult to build a car with no changes. Like you just build it, it's done, you bring it to race, it's the perfect thing in the world. That's just not going to happen. You will have things that you have to deal with. You have to have things that you're going to re-engineer. So you need to allocate time for that, or else you get to the race, you're still trying to piece things in the parking lot or in the garage. Okay, so when we start putting an actual notional schedule together, you can start seeing, I split it up and say, okay, so in December you might build the frame chassis, then you start adding wheels to it, then you start powering it, then you add the array. You build these macro things to start, and then you start breaking this down. What do I need to do to get a chassis together? Well, I gotta design and put some initial framing together. I've got to put a roll cage and roll bar in there, put some axles, seat, suspension, and you just start breaking things down into smaller and smaller pieces. Additionally, sure, I'm building a chassis here, but I know that way out here, I'm going to be working on power stuff. And I've got to make sure that I get everything done in time to meet this schedule. So you start working backwards and say, okay, well, if I'm going to have a power chassis by then, I'm going to need some time to wire it. That means I have to have the battery in place, which means I have to have the instrument panel in place, which means I have to have a design for how to do all that in place. So even though my goal is to have a chassis out here in December, I'm actually working on electrical stuff in preparation for February deadline. And so this is all about planning, knowing what needs to get done, and breaking things down to smaller and smaller pieces. Okay, so I gave you a macro. Okay, yeah, you got to do steering, but what does that mean? So that you start breaking things down into individual to-do tasks that you can give to a student. Well, if I have to do steering, I got to find out what part am I using, where am I putting it, how does it connect? You got to figure out, okay, you've got the front wheels, where did they go? How do you put it together? What's the size of the rods? And you got to fabricate those things. So if I were to give the task, go do steering, to a student, they may not even know necessarily what to do. But if I go and break that down and say, go and install the front wheels, go and fabricate the steering rod, you could probably tell someone to do that. And by the way, I'm not advocating that the advisors go and plan out the schedule. I'm advocating that team captains, sub-team captains, all work together to figure out what the schedule is in collaboration with their advisor. You know, you guys can do the project management just as well as an advisor could. Right? And then try to break every task into something that's achievable on a given workday. You know, this gives you a list of tasks that says, okay, when I'm coming together as a team, we're going to work on these things. On the Notional Schedule team, we had a whiteboard. We wrote down all the tasks and said, this is what we got to accomplish today. When you're done with it, check the box. And you get that sense of accomplishment that says, hey, you know, I've got all these things done today. Sure, there's going to be a list of things that won't be complete, and that'll get rolled over next week. There's also, we put a list of tasks that we are stretch goals, so we may bring those into the current week if we had team members sitting around, they finished early. So, you know, have that list of tasks that you are flexible with. And it gives each team member responsibility. It's nice to say, hey, you're responsible for this. They do it, they say, yeah, I did that. If you have a bigger task and you have a whole bunch of people working on it, it's like, yeah, I contributed to it, but you never really own something. Okay. This is an example workday on the Notional Schedule team. At the time, we had 2 cars. We had an electric solar-powered car and an advanced division car. And so around this time when I created this presentation, I just copied what was on the board. We were fabricating the steering tie rods. We were fixing the rear suspension, installing the throttle pedal return spring, and so on. So you can see that they're fairly discrete, something I can just hand to a student and say, go do these things. Of course, in an ideal world, all the tasks, you were able to lay it all out in a schedule and things finish on time. Never gonna happen. Things will come up. So account for unplanned tasks. If you start planning things out and you go, oh, well, I installed the steering, but it doesn't seem to work properly because there was some interference in the way. I didn't plan for that. You know, hopefully your design had worked that out, but maybe it didn't. So you gotta plan time for that, and this is what we call a living schedule. You have to reschedule things and account for that. This is why you want to finish early. If you plan a schedule that's going to be early, you have some buffer time to eat into. If you say, I'm going to finish just in time in July, when things slip, you slip, and you just miss the deadline to come to the race. Okay? Account for delayed tasks, and then be aggressive in planning. I say this, tasks will never take less time than you plan. That happens on very small occasions, but most of the time you'll think of something and you'll say, oops, I didn't account for this, or oops, this is going to take longer. I'll share this thing. I was working this previous weekend on building a smoker for a barbecue using 55-gallon steel drums. Just a side project, nothing to do with solar car. I said, I have to finish this in a day. That's all I've allocated to it. So, you know, we're going to try to schedule it. We chopped out, we prepped all the tasks. Didn't finish on time. So, you know, I had to shove it to Thursday and get it done. But why did I slip schedule? Well, even though I planned all the dimensions as much as possible, as we start fabrication, you'll notice that things happen. For me, the door didn't quite close exactly the right way, so I had to redesign that. We had to redesign the stand a little bit because in the course of welding, the metal warps a little bit and it didn't quite fit exactly where the design drawing was. You're going to have the same stuff in solar car. So just plan for that so that you can have enough slippage time to be able to meet your deadline. So, you know, summary is basically saying, you know, project management is important. You got to do it. You got to be able to break down your task into smaller pieces. We have resources to help you with that. So, You can look at the pamphlet, you can come talk to any solar car advisor who's built a car in the past, and then be ready to be flexible with your schedule and give yourself enough buffer time for contingencies. So,
I've got something to say here. I want to say how important this is. 2 reasons. First off, we want you to be a success. Secondly, because it gives you a chance to take advantage of all the huge amount of learning opportunities through this program. And you're saying, well, we don't have to follow that schedule. We'll come up with our own time frame. I remember the team that arrived here and said, we built our car in 6 weeks and we're ready to go. While they were doing a pre-scrutineering right out here in the parking lot, their battery box exploded. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Why? Because they didn't know what they were doing. Another team that arrived with just a month preparation comes and they can't do 1 lap on the track. So you're not getting the benefit about this unless you take it and order in such a way that you can handle it, the people on your team can be prepared to handle it, and you know what you're going to do. We like to visualize everything. We had giant maps across our classroom where we would see what we were doing. There is nothing like the guilt of walking into your classroom and see you behind schedule. So, not a bad thing.
I will also make a pitch for, the whole idea of building a solar car isn't just to have a solar car at the race. It's nice, we love being able to try it out, but it's really teaching you different life skills. Learning project management for any type of job that you're going to have in the future is really important. So if you get a chance to practice this, just as you got a chance to learn how to weld, learn how to put things together, learn the electrical systems, that's going to be important. Are there any questions that you have?
Where can we find this pamphlet?
They were available on the New Teams workshop. I can get you one afterwards.
Thank you.